Hey fly tires, welcome back. I'm Matt, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Now, one of the most fun things about having this channel is getting to know all you guys out there, all the fly tyers, some veteran fly tyers, some folks who've been tying for a year or two, and then some folks who've been tying for just a couple of weeks. And I'm talking, corresponding through the comments in each of these videos and via email. There are lots of you out there that we've got plenty of correspondence going on via email. I mean, several of you folks out there like Michael, Ron, Jamie, Layton, Al, we email pictures of flies back and forth and, book recommendations and just all kinds of, back and forth about fly fishing topics. I've had some great conversations with Bob and Jim, both of you, Vatter and McCutcheon. And just today, Steve sent me a pretty awesome link about tying an articulated nymph. And I love this thing. I want to do it for the channel. I mean, it's going to take a little practice, but hey, we'll get to it. Now, one of the folks I've been emailing back and forth with some flies and ideas and such is Joe Sather, another fellow Marylander from up in Baltimore. Just this week, he sent me a picture of several of his flies. He was just experimenting at the bench, putting material on the hook and seeing how it turned out. And a couple of these flies that he sent, well, a couple of them looked pretty crazy, but a couple of them I saw and said, these are going to catch fish. And one of them in particular is the one we're going to do today. This is just a very simple fly. It's got a Peacock herl body and a Partridge hackle. So two of our favorite fly tying materials, Peacock and Partridge. Now, I know, there are tons of flies out there with Peacock and Partridge. Not really anything new, but we have given this one a little bit of a distinct look. We put a hard red thread head on it. So it's kind of got a red hot spot up there in the head, and then Partridge tail and Peacock body and Partridge hackle. So I think with this red head, this fly that Joe came up with, it's distinct enough that we can give it a name. So I asked Joe, I said, hey, what do you want to call this thing? Now, he didn't have a name for it, but he said, well, since we're both from Maryland, why don't we just call it something to do with Maryland? I said, okay, great idea. We brainstormed a little bit, and I thought up the Allegany. My farm's in Allegany County, and I'm thinking this is probably the first chance I'll get to try this fly will be out at the farm. So why don't we call it that? I looked it up, and as far as I could tell, a couple of Google searches, I don't think there's ever been any fly pattern with Allegany in the name, so that's what we're calling it. So again, it's a very simple pattern, probably not a whole lot of tactics in tying this fly that a veteran tyer doesn't already know. I do talk about a couple of tips in this very tie that, a new tyer might find convenient. So any new tyers out there watching this, I encourage you to give it a shot. I promise you this fly is going to catch fish. So all right, that's enough of an intro. Let's get into today's fly, Joe Sather's Allegany. So there you go in the vise, Joe Sather's Allegany, the Allegany Nymph. Now I'm tying this on a size 12. It's a barbless nymph hook, 1X long, 1X strong. And I'm going to put down some weight, 015, about 10 or 12 wraps. And I'm using red thread. This is a 70 denier UTC. I'll put a dam behind it, take it up over the weight, put another dam up front, and then bring it back to the bend of the hook. Now, I know this is a simple fly, and most tyers could look at a picture of it and do it without any instruction, but I'm going to give you a couple of tips here that apply to lots of flies. So the first one is, if you ever let your bobbin hang like mine is doing right now, it will naturally start to spin in one direction. The thread has an equilibrium. It's just multi-stranded spun fibers that make the thread. So it's almost to its equilibrium state. And when you get it to that, you see that, those wraps right there, they're not completely flat. So what you can do, just spin it a few more turns from the way it was spinning, and then just take a look at it, and you can slowly, if you pay attention, watch it flatten out. So now, watch the point of my hook, but I'm laying some pretty flat thread wraps on it right now, but keep in mind that every wrap you put on the hook, you're putting one more twist in your thread. So 3 wraps, I might just need to spin the bobbin 3 more turns to the left if I want to keep going back with flat thread wraps. So that is a fairly flat looking tag right there. So back to the fly. Let's tie in our tail. So I'm just going to use some Partridge. The hackle up front is Partridge, as is the tail. So I'll just take this small feather. I'm going to kind of pull them out perpendicular right there, and then grab about 8 or 10 of them and just pull them off. Now it's not a real long tail. I'd say maybe a hook gap, maybe not even that long. So let's catch this in right here and then take a look at it. Yep, that's about what I want, just a little wisp of a tail. And I'm going to catch this in back up to the weight, to the weighted wraps. You could probably bury that in because we've got the Peacock herl body, and a little bit of the lump right there isn't going to matter. Or you could just trim it, whatever you want to do. But after you get the tail caught in, let's take our wire rib. Just copper, any color you want. A light color I think is going to be cool. And this is a size small. I tied a couple with brassy and it looked fine, so you could go up to a brassy if you want, but I'm not really adding this for weight. I'm just putting it on here for the most part to give this Peacock herl some strength. So take your thread up a couple millimeters. Now take 2 strands of Peacock herl. So I've got these 2 strands right here. I'm going to snip off the first couple of inches of brittle stuff and then just catch these in going back to the tail. Okay, that'll work. And then I'm going to hang my thread about midway through the body, and that is so that when I wrap it up to that point, these herls will not start spreading out on me too much. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Just take even our touch and turns, one right in front of the other, all the way up. We don't want a big fat body, so we got this weight on it anyway. So just take these up here, and then when you get to the thread will kind of help keep holding these Peacock herls together. And we're going to wrap this body up just in front of the weight. We're putting a hackle up front, but it's not a big one, not at all. It doesn't take much space. So a couple of thread wraps there, locks your Peacock herl body in. Go ahead and snip this off. Now let's counter wrap this rib. 4 or 5 turns will certainly be sufficient. Again, it's mainly just to lock this herl in. And when I get to the front, I'll put 2, wraps as tight as I can get it, and then kind of pull my wire up forward again, and then a couple extra turns. That way when I spin this off, there's no risk of unraveling that wire. And I always like to check just to make sure you don't have a sharp point where you broke that wire off. If you do, put a couple of loose wraps to bury it. Now it's time for the hackle. More Partridge. Just a tiny, tiny little feather right here. Got this one. I pulled off the fluff off the bottom. I'll grab it by the tip and then just pull it back. And I've got maybe a 1/2 inch of, feather with the fibers coming off of it, but that's going to be plenty. I'm going to put 2 wraps of this, and that will be more than enough hackle on this small guy. So 2 wraps to catch it in. I'm going to fold this tip back over and lock it in with a few more wraps. Now here's another tip. That's about where I'm going to end the hackle. I'll just put a couple of extra wraps going forward that I can back off when I want to catch that hackle in. So if you need to, reach in here and then snip off that excess tip. I probably don't need to in this one because it wasn't very long, but why not? Okay, now take your hackle pliers, or if you got real dexterous fingers, maybe you don't need them, but I don't. Just going to pull these back, and I'm going to put 2 wraps right here, one right in front of the other. So just kind of pull these back as I wrap it around, and I let it slip out of my hackle pliers. I'm sure that never happens to any of you guys, just me. So we can start it over. All right. 1 wrap. And here's 2. So I'm wanting to catch it off, but see my thread is not hanging right there where I want to catch it. That's why I put those couple of extra wraps so I can spin it back and get a little bit closer to my hackle. All right, now just work a thread through there with 2 wraps, and that's going to be enough hackle on our hook. And I can go ahead and snip this excess off right here. And we just want to push these any going forward. Let's just push them back and work on our head. A few wraps rearward will get them laying back. Pretty much what I want right there. But I am going to build a bigger head on this. I think this is one of the features on this, building a big red, hard, shiny head. It's a hot spot, so to speak. So spend a few extra turns, put a nice big head on it. I'm going to try and flatten this thread out just a little bit before I put my whip finish down. It might make for a little bit smoother of a head. But I think what we have right here is going to be fine, because I'm going to put a big dollop of UV resin on it to get that nice hard head and nice shiny head. Now I mentioned 2 tips on these that I was going to go through while tying this. The next one is, if you ever have issues when you're cutting your thread off and you end up with a big, couple of millimeters tag, it's kind of annoying. What you can do, and I don't always do this, but sometimes, just find the point where you're pulling your thread out perpendicular to the hook. Put some tension on it. So I'm pulling this out and I've got the thread pretty tight. I'm just going to put my scissors in here, right up under it, and then just kind of saw it. See that? Now I don't really have much of a tag left. So I've got it'll make your heads a little cleaner when you can do that. Again, I don't always do that because a lot of times I'm kind of lazy, but it'll get it a little bit cleaner. Then you got some room to put your hard UV resin on here. I'm gonna put 1 drop, maybe 2. So see if I can smooth this around the head here. Always be careful not to get it in your eye. Not the end of the world if you do, but sometimes it's kind of a pain in the butt. So I think we've got enough resin on there. Let's give that a quick spin, let it smooth out, and put the UV light on it. 10-15 seconds, and that will be a nice, hard, shiny head. So that's it. The Allegany, created by Joe Sather. Pretty cool fly. This thing's so easy to tie, but it's going to catch fish. I know this thing is going to do great. There's just so many patterns out there, kind of similar to this. So I encourage you to give it a shot. But that's it, my friends. I appreciate you watching. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.